Daniel Carter stood outside the grand ballroom of the Chicago Grand Hotel, adjusting his tie as he glanced at his reflection in one of the towering glass doors. He had always been particular about how he looked, especially when attending events like this. Tonight was no exception. The annual charity gala brought together some of the most influential people in the city, business leaders, politicians, celebrities, and Daniel knew he needed to make an impression. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the nearby garden terrace. Inside the ballroom, laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses, but Daniel felt restless. These kinds of gatherings were part of his job, yet they often left him feeling empty. He had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, building his tech empire brick by brick until he reached the top. But now, standing here alone, he wondered if all that success truly mattered. Deciding to clear his head, Daniel stepped out onto the garden terrace. It was quieter here, away from the noise and the crowd. Soft string lights hung above, casting a golden glow over the space. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of potted plants lining the edges of the walkway. In the center of the terrace stood a large fountain, its water shimmering under the light. As Daniel approached the fountain, he noticed two children playing nearby. They seemed oblivious to the world around them, lost in their own little universe. The boy, who appeared to be about 10 years old, had dark hair and piercing blue eyes that caught Daniel's attention immediately. There was something familiar about those eyes, something hauntingly recognizable. The girl, slightly younger, laughed as she chased after her brother, her blonde curls bouncing with every step. For a moment, Daniel simply watched them, transfixed. His mind raced with thoughts he couldn't quite put into words. Those eyes. Where had he seen them before? And why did the boy's face remind him so much of himself at that age? Shaking off the strange sensation, Daniel decided to approach them. "Hey there," he said softly, kneeling down to their level. "Are you two having fun?" The boy stopped mid-step, turning to look at Daniel with curiosity. "Yeah," he replied, his voice steady and confident. "We're just playing." "And where are your parents?" Daniel asked, glancing around to see if anyone was watching over them. Before the boy could answer, a voice called out from across the terrace. "Ethan, Lily, come here, please." Daniel turned to see a woman walking toward them. She looked to be in her late 30s with shoulder-length brown hair and a calm demeanor. As she drew closer, Daniel froze. His heart skipped a beat. It was Laura Bennett, his ex-wife. Laura stopped a few feet away, her gaze shifting between Daniel and the children. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. 15 years had passed since they last saw each other, and the years had treated her well. She still carried herself with the same quiet grace he remembered, though there were lines on her face that hadn't been there before. "Daniel," she said finally, her tone neutral but edged with caution. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Daniel replied, rising to his feet. "It's good to see you." He hesitated, unsure of what else to say. Then his eyes drifted back to the children, who were now standing beside Laura, looking up at her expectantly. "They're yours?" Daniel asked, gesturing toward the kids. Laura nodded slowly. "Yes, this is Ethan and Lily." Her voice softened as she introduced them, placing a protective hand on each of their shoulders. Ethan stared at Daniel with those same piercing blue eyes, while Lily smiled shyly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. There was no denying it, the resemblance was uncanny. Ethan's features, his mannerisms, even the way he held himself. It was like looking into a mirror from decades ago. "Do they?" Daniel began, but trailed off, unsure how to phrase the question burning in his mind. "Do they belong to me? Is that even possible?" Laura seemed to sense what he was thinking. Her expression hardened ever so slightly, and she took a small step back, pulling the children closer to her side. "We should go," she said abruptly. "It's getting late and they need to rest." "But wait," Daniel started, reaching out instinctively, though he wasn't sure what he wanted to say. "It was nice seeing you, Daniel," Laura interrupted, her tone polite but firm. Without waiting for a response, she turned and led the children away, disappearing into the crowd inside the ballroom. Daniel stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where they had been. His mind was spinning with questions, doubts, and a growing suspicion that refused to be ignored. Those children, they couldn't just be a coincidence, could they? He shook his head, trying to push the thought aside. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe the stress of work and the pressures of life were playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew better. Something wasn't right, and he intended to find out what it was. With a heavy sigh, Daniel returned to the ballroom, rejoining the sea of faces and forced smiles. Yet no matter how hard he tried to focus on conversations or mingle with guests, his thoughts kept drifting back to Laura and the children. Who were they, really? And why did meeting them feel like opening a door to a past he thought he'd closed forever? The next morning, Daniel woke up feeling unsettled. Sleep had eluded him most of the night, his mind replaying the events from the gala over and over again. He couldn't shake the image of those two children, Ethan and Lily, and how much they resembled him. Their faces haunted him, filling him with questions that demanded answers. After tossing and turning for hours, Daniel finally got out of bed and made himself a cup of coffee. Standing by the large windows of his penthouse apartment, he gazed out at the city skyline bathed in the soft light of dawn. Normally, this view brought him a sense of calm, but today it did nothing to ease his racing thoughts. Laura's sudden appearance after all these years, and with children who looked so much like him, was too strange to ignore. He decided to reach out to her. It wasn't going to be easy. Their divorce had been messy, and they hadn't spoken since. But something inside him told him he needed to try. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found her number. It was still saved there from years ago, untouched and forgotten. Taking a deep breath, he dialed. The phone rang several times before she answered. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, almost wary. "Laura, it's me. Daniel," he said quickly, not wanting her to hang up. I need to talk to you." There was a long pause on the other end. "About what, Daniel?" she asked finally, her tone measured. "About last night," he replied. "About Ethan and Lily. Look, I know this is awkward, but we need to clear things up. Can we meet somewhere just for a few minutes?" Another pause. Then reluctantly she agreed. "Fine. There's a cafe near my place called Harper's Corner. Meet me there at noon." Relieved, Daniel thanked her and ended the call. For the rest of the morning, he paced around his apartment, rehearsing what he would say. How do you ask someone if the children they introduced as theirs might actually belong to you? And why hadn't she told him about them all these years? At exactly noon, Daniel arrived at Harper's Corner. The cafe was cozy and quiet, with wooden tables and chairs scattered around the room. Sunlight poured through the windows, creating warm patches on the floor. He spotted Laura right away, sitting at a corner table with Ethan and Lily. They were both occupied with coloring books, their heads bent low as they drew pictures. When Laura saw him approach, she gave him a tight smile. "You're punctual," she remarked dryly. "I didn't want to waste any time," Daniel replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from her. His eyes flickered toward the children briefly before returning to Laura. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." She nodded stiffly, folding her arms across her chest. "So, what is it you want to talk about?" Daniel hesitated, unsure where to begin. "I guess I'll just come out and say it," he started, leaning forward slightly. "Those kids, they look an awful lot like me. Are they mine?" Laura's expression hardened instantly. She glanced at the children, who were blissfully unaware of the tension between the adults, then back at Daniel. "Why are you asking me this now?" she countered sharply. "It's been 15 years, Daniel. Why does it matter?" "It matters because they're my kids," he shot back, his voice rising unintentionally. Realizing his tone might scare the children, he lowered it quickly. "If they're mine, I deserve to know. Don't I have a right to that much?" Laura sighed deeply, rubbing her temples as though trying to ward off a headache. "Yes, they're yours," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan and Lily are your children. For a moment, Daniel felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. His stomach churned with a mix of emotions, shock, anger, guilt, and even a flicker of joy. All this time, he'd thought he was childless, free to focus on his career without distractions. And yet here were two beautiful children who shared his DNA, living lives he knew nothing about. "How could you keep this from me?" he asked quietly, struggling to keep his voice steady. "All these years, you never said a word. Did you think I wouldn't care?" "I didn't think you'd want to know," Laura replied, her own voice trembling now. "Back then, when I found out I was pregnant, I knew how obsessed you were with your work. You barely had time for us when we were married, let alone for raising a family. I didn't see the point in telling you, knowing it would only complicate things." "That's not fair," Daniel protested. "You didn't give me a chance to decide for myself. What if I had wanted to be part of their lives? What if you hadn't?" Laura shot back, her eyes flashing with emotion. "What if you walked away like you did with everything else? I couldn't take that risk, Daniel. Not with them." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, himself. Deep down he knew she had a point. Back then he had been selfish, prioritizing his ambitions over everything else. But that didn't make her decision right either. Before he could respond, Ethan suddenly looked up from his coloring book. "Mom, can we get some juice?" he asked innocently. Laura forced a smile and nodded. "Sure, sweetie. Go ahead and ask," the waiter. As Ethan and Lily hopped off their chairs and ran to the counter, Daniel watched them go, his heart aching. These were his children, his flesh and blood, and he'd missed so much of their lives already. He turned back to Laura, his frustration giving way to desperation. "I want to be part of their lives now," he said firmly. "Whatever mistakes I made in the past, I can't change that. But I can start making things right moving forward. Please, Laura. Let me be their father." Laura studied him carefully, searching his face for sincerity. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said softly. "But this isn't going to be easy. They don't know you, Daniel. You'll have to earn their trust, and mine." "I understand," he replied, relief washing over him. "I'll do whatever it takes." For the first time since they'd met that morning, Laura's expression softened. She glanced at the children, who were laughing as they carried cups of juice back to the table. "Just promise me one thing," she said, looking at Daniel again. "Don't hurt them. If you're serious about being in their lives, don't walk away halfway through." "I won't," Daniel promised, his voice filled with determination. "Never again." As the four of them sat together in the cozy cafe, surrounded by the hum of quiet conversations and the smell of freshly brewed coffee, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. This wouldn't be easy. He knew that. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Over the next few days, Daniel tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to Ethan and Lily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, Ethan's piercing blue eyes staring at him curiously, and Lily's bright smile as she laughed over a cup of juice. They were his children, and yet they felt like strangers. He had so much catching up to do, so many years of missed memories that could never be recovered. But something still didn't sit right with him. Laura had admitted that Ethan and Lily were his kids, but there was more to the story. He could feel it in the way she avoided certain questions, the way her voice wavered when she spoke about their lives. There was a secret lurking beneath the surface, and Daniel needed to uncover it. He decided to hire a private investigator. After some research, he found Rachel Monroe, a seasoned professional known for her discretion and thoroughness. She agreed to meet him at her office later that week, and Daniel spent the entire drive over rehearsing what he would say. This wasn't just about satisfying his curiosity. It was about understanding who his children really were, and ensuring he could provide them with everything they needed. Rachel's office was located in a quiet part of the city, tucked away, above a small bookstore. When Daniel arrived, she greeted him warmly and gestured for him to take a seat across from her desk. The room was cluttered but organized, with stacks of files and photos pinned to a corkboard on the wall. "So," Rachel began, leaning forward slightly, "what can I help you with?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I recently discovered that I have 2 children, a boy named Ethan and a girl named Lily. Their mother is my ex-wife, Laura Bennett. She told me they're mine, but I think there's more to the story. Something she's not telling me." Rachel nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes on a pad of paper. "Do you have any specific suspicions, or are you just looking for general information?" "I'm not sure," Daniel admitted. "But I get the feeling she's hiding something important, maybe about their health or where they've been living. Or, I don't know. Just dig into everything you can find." "Understood," Rachel replied with a reassuring smile. "Give me a week or 2, and I'll see what I can uncover." True to her word, Rachel delivered her report exactly 12 days later. Daniel met her at the same office, his nerves on edge as he waited for her to speak. She handed him a thick folder filled with documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. "I started with public records," Rachel explained, flipping through the pages. "Laura filed for divorce shortly after your split, citing irreconcilable differences. Around the same time, she moved out of state and settled in a small town near Chicago. That's where Ethan and Lily were born." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the information. None of this was particularly surprising, but it confirmed what Laura had already told him. "Then things got interesting," Rachel continued. "About 6 years ago, Ethan was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition. It's called neurogenetic disorder type 7, or NGD7 for short. It affects brain development and motor skills, and without treatment, it's usually fatal within a few years." Daniel's heart sank. "Is he okay now?" he asked anxiously. "That's where it gets complicated," Rachel said, pulling out another document. "Laura enrolled both Ethan and Lily in an experimental gene therapy program run by one of your biggest competitors, Reynolds Biotech. The treatment worked. It saved Ethan's life, but it also altered their DNA in ways that aren't fully understood yet." "What do you mean, altered their DNA?" Daniel pressed, his voice rising. Rachel hesitated before answering. "According to my sources, the therapy gave them abilities far beyond what's considered normal. For example, Ethan demonstrates cognitive abilities far above his age group. He solves complex puzzles designed for adults in seconds. And Lily, well, let's just say she has powers that defy explanation." "Powers?" Daniel repeated, incredulous. "Like what?" Rachel glanced at him cautiously. "Telekinesis, for one. She can move objects with her mind. Not large ones, but enough to raise eyebrows if anyone sees her do it. These aren't just rumors either. I've seen video footage confirming it." Daniel sat back in his chair, stunned. His children weren't just extraordinary because of their intelligence or personalities. They were literally unlike anyone else. The weight of this revelation hit him hard. What did it mean to be the father of 2 kids with superhuman abilities? How was he supposed to protect them from a world that might exploit or fear them? "There's more," Rachel added softly. "The government has taken an interest in their case. So far, nothing official has been done, but there are whispers of monitoring programs and potential interventions. Laura has gone to great lengths to keep them hidden, moving them from school to school and avoiding attention." Daniel rubbed his temples, overwhelmed by everything he'd just learned. "Why didn't she tell me any of this?" He muttered, more to himself than to Rachel. "Maybe she didn't trust you," Rachel suggested gently. "Or maybe she thought you wouldn't understand. Either way, you're going to have to decide how to handle this moving forward." After leaving Rachel's office, Daniel drove aimlessly around the city, trying to process everything. His mind raced with questions and fears. What kind of future awaited Ethan and Lily? Would they always live in hiding, constantly looking over their shoulders? And most importantly, how could he step into their lives without making things worse? By the time he returned home, night had fallen, blanketing the city in darkness. Sitting alone in his penthouse, Daniel stared out at the glittering skyline, feeling smaller than ever before. Tomorrow, he would confront Laura again, not with anger, but with determination. He owed it to Ethan and Lily to be the father they deserved, no matter how challenging the road ahead might be. For the first time in years, Daniel realized that success wasn't measured by wealth or power. It was measured by the love and support you gave to the people who mattered most. And, now more than anything, he wanted to prove to his children and to himself that he was capable of being that person. The next morning, Daniel called Laura and asked to meet again. This time he didn't want to do it in public. He needed privacy, a space where they could talk openly without interruptions. Laura hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, inviting him to her home later that afternoon. When Daniel arrived, he was struck by how ordinary the house looked. It was a modest two-story building in a quiet suburban neighborhood, with flower beds lining the front yard and a swing set in the backyard. Nothing about it suggested the extraordinary lives being lived inside. Laura greeted him at the door, her expression cautious but not unwelcoming. "Come in," she said simply, stepping aside to let him enter. Ethan and Lily were sitting on the living room floor, playing with blocks and stuffed animals. They glanced up when Daniel walked in, their eyes curious but unafraid. "Thank you for seeing me," Daniel began, taking a seat on the couch. Laura joined him, keeping some distance between them as she folded her arms across her chest. "What's this about, Daniel?" she asked, her tone firm but tinged with weariness. "You've been digging into things you don't understand." "I know," Daniel admitted, his voice steady. "And I'm sorry if I overstepped, but I had to find out the truth. About Ethan and Lily, about everything." Laura sighed deeply, her gaze dropping to the floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally she nodded. "You're right. There's more to the story than I told you before. And maybe it's time you knew." She turned to the children, who were still watching them curiously. "Ethan, Lily, why don't you go play upstairs for a bit? Mommy needs to talk to Daniel alone." Ethan frowned slightly, clearly sensing the seriousness of the situation, but he didn't argue. Taking Lily's hand, he led her toward the staircase, leaving Daniel and Laura alone in the living room. Once the sound of footsteps faded, Laura leaned back against the couch, her posture stiff with tension. "I didn't lie to you when I said Ethan was sick," she began. "But I didn't tell you the whole truth either. When he was diagnosed with NGD7, doctors told me there was no cure, no hope. I couldn't accept that, so I started looking for alternatives." Daniel listened intently, his heart pounding in his chest. He already knew part of what she was going to say, but hearing it directly from her made it feel even heavier. "I found out about the gene therapy program through a friend," Laura continued. "It was experimental, risky, and incredibly expensive, but I didn't care about the cost. I just wanted my son to live. So I enrolled both Ethan and Lily, hoping it would save Ethan and prevent Lily from ever developing the same condition." "And it worked?" Daniel asked softly, though he already knew the answer. "It did," Laura confirmed. "But it also changed them in ways I never expected. At first, it seemed like a miracle. Ethan's condition improved rapidly, and he started showing signs of advanced intelligence, things most kids his age couldn't even begin to comprehend. And then there was Lily." Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, her jaw tightening. "Lily developed abilities that scared me at first. She could move objects without touching them, make things float in midair. At first I thought I was imagining it, but the evidence was undeniable. It wasn't just Ethan who had been affected, it was both of them." Daniel swallowed hard, trying to process everything she was saying. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why keep this from me all these years?" "I was scared," Laura admitted, her eyes filling with tears. "Scared of what you'd think? Scared of what the world would do to them if anyone found out? People don't react well to things they don't understand, Daniel. If word got out about Ethan and Lily, they'd be treated like lab rats, or worse. I couldn't risk that." "But you didn't have to face it alone," Daniel countered, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm their father, Laura. Don't you think I had a right to know, to help you carry the burden?" "You weren't there," Laura snapped, her composure breaking for the first time. When I needed you the most, you were too busy chasing your dreams to even notice we existed. How could I trust you to step up now?" Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself, realizing she was right. Back then he had chosen his career over his family. He had walked away, leaving Laura to deal with everything on her own. And now, years later, he was paying the price for his selfishness. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't change the past, Laura, but I can try to make things right moving forward. Let me be part of their lives, not just as their father, but as someone who can protect them and support you." Laura studied him carefully, searching his face for sincerity. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered, "but this isn't going to be easy. You'll have to earn their trust and mine, and you need to understand that their safety comes first. Always." "I understand," Daniel replied, his voice resolute. "Whatever it takes." Over the next hour, they talked more about the challenges ahead. Laura explained the precautions she'd taken to keep Ethan and Lily hidden from prying eyes, changing schools frequently, avoiding social media, and teaching them to control their abilities, discreet, easily noticeable. Daniel listened intently, committing every detail to memory. By the time he left the house, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the street. As he drove home, Daniel felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: guilt for the years he'd missed, fear for the future, and determination to do better. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a purpose. For Ethan and Lily, he would become the man they needed him to be. Not just a father, but a protector, a guide, and a source of unconditional love. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, together with Laura and their remarkable children. Over the following weeks, Daniel threw himself into building a relationship with Ethan and Lily. It wasn't easy. Years of absence couldn't be erased overnight, but he was determined to make up for lost time. Laura had given him permission to visit regularly, and though she remained cautious, she seemed willing to let him prove himself. Daniel started small, bringing puzzles and science kits during his visits to bond with Ethan, who loved solving problems and learning new things. At first, Ethan was reserved, observing Daniel carefully before engaging. But as they worked together, Daniel noticed a shift. Ethan began asking questions, sharing his thoughts, and even laughing at Daniel's jokes. Each tiny breakthrough filled Daniel with pride and hope. Lily, on the other hand, was more open but equally fascinating. She adored playing games that involved her unique abilities, often giggling as she made toys hover or zoom across the room. Daniel marveled at her powers, encouraging her to explore them safely, while reminding her of the importance of keeping them secret. "It's like having a superpower," he told her one day, "but superheroes are careful about when and where they use their gifts." Laura watched these interactions quietly, her initial skepticism gradually giving way to trust. She saw how patiently Daniel listened to the children, how he celebrated their achievements no matter how small, and how he handled moments of frustration with grace. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to co-parent and give Ethan and Lily the stable family they deserved, but challenges still lay ahead. One afternoon, while Daniel was helping Ethan build a model airplane in the backyard, Lily suddenly froze, staring intently at a nearby tree. Her eyes widened, and without warning, a branch snapped off and floated toward her. Ethan turned to watch, unfazed by the display, but Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "Lily," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We talked about this, remember? You have to be careful outside the house." "I know," she replied softly, lowering the branch back to the ground. "I didn't mean to. It just happened." "It's okay," Daniel assured her, pulling her into a hug. "You're still learning, and that's perfectly fine. Just try to stay focused, okay?" Later that evening, Daniel sat with Laura in the kitchen, discussing what had happened. "She's getting stronger," Laura admitted, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Sometimes I worry we won't be able to keep her or Ethan hidden forever. We'll figure it out, Daniel said firmly. Together. If anyone starts asking questions, we'll deal with it as a team. But for now, let's focus on teaching them control. They're smart kids. They'll learn. His confidence reassured her, and over time, they developed strategies to help the children manage their abilities discreetly. They practiced scenarios at home, role-playing situations where Ethan's intelligence might draw unwanted attention, or where Lily's telekinesis could accidentally reveal itself. Slowly but surely, the children grew more disciplined, learning to navigate the world around them with care. As months passed, Daniel found himself reevaluating his priorities. His tech company had always been his life's work, but now, spending time with Ethan and Lily gave him a sense of fulfillment he'd never experienced before. He realized that success wasn't measured by boardroom victories or stock prices. It was measured by the love and connection you shared with others. One evening, after tucking Ethan and Lily into bed during one of his weekend visits, Daniel sat down with Laura in the living room. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly, "about stepping down as CEO." Laura raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Are you sure? That's a big decision." "I'm sure," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "Being a father is more important to me now than running a company. Besides, I've spent my whole life chasing success, but none of it matters if I don't have people to share it with. Ethan and Lily need me, and so do you." For a moment, Laura didn't respond. Then, a small smile spread across her face. "That's quite a change from the man I used to know," she said softly. "But I think it's the right decision for all of us." With Laura's support, Daniel announced his resignation to the board of directors. The news sent shockwaves through the business world, but Daniel didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt free to focus on what truly mattered. In the months that followed, Daniel became a constant presence in Ethan and Lily's lives. He attended school events, helped them with homework, and cheered them on during soccer games. He also worked closely with Laura to monitor any potential threats to their safety, staying vigilant against government agencies or rival corporations that might take an interest in the children's abilities. Despite the challenges, there were moments of pure joy, like the day Ethan solved a complex math problem faster than his teacher, or when Lily successfully used her powers to rescue a stuck kite from a tree without anyone noticing. These milestones reminded Daniel why he had chosen this path, filling him with gratitude and purpose. As the seasons changed, so did their family dynamic. Though Daniel and Laura weren't ready to reconcile romantically, they found common ground in raising Ethan and Lily. Their shared commitment to protecting the children created a bond neither of them had anticipated, a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. One sunny afternoon, as they picnicked in the park, Daniel looked around at his family and felt a deep sense of peace. Ethan was explaining the mechanics of flight using a paper airplane, while Lily laughed as she made dandelion seeds float lazily through the air. Laura sat beside him, her expression calm and content. "You've come a long way," she remarked, catching his gaze. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you," Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you or them." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play. In that moment, Daniel realized that life's greatest gifts often came wrapped in mystery, and sometimes the hardest truths led to the most profound transformations. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Daniel knew they still had challenges ahead, but whatever the future held, they would face it together as a family.